Okay, who got a chance to look at the Scripture Labs thing? How was it?
English lesson, kind of. Like setup, plot.
Oh, yeah.
kind of
Okay.
English thing.
Sure.
I thought I was doing really well for the first two parts, and then we started the harder stuff, and I was like, oh boy, I think I might give up. But yeah, it got a lot harder.
Nice.
That was interesting. I never realized the difference between, like, how that was a shift in the story of Genesis on how God interacts with people.
What was a shift?
So like before, I think it's Genesis 12 that we read, I hope. But before that, God is always dealing with the conduct of people and their like addressing their sin, like the way they, basically. And so then in that chapter, God doesn't address really Abraham's lies. God rewards his obedience more so, and then they were saying how God is worried, focusing on fulfilling his role, that the misconduct of people is not going to break or make it so that way he can't fulfill what he is purposed to do or set out to do. And I'd never seen that in the book of Genesis before. I don't know if I'm explaining that correctly.
Oh, that's great.
But I just thought that was really eye-opening to me. I was like, wow, I didn't know that this was a shift in the book. So that was kind of cool to realize that.
Nice. Good. What else?
It was frustrating once I got the right problem. It kept making me go back and find the other problems and then found this one and explain to me how they weren't the problem. Maybe one more would have been good, but not like I had to do all of them. But it was good. It was interesting.
Nice. But what's the point of that whole thing?
Just making you shift your perspective on what maybe you are looking at stuff.
Okay.
Well, I understand stories.
Yeah. So how do you understand stories?
You have to find the plot or disruption.
Okay. Good. Why? Not just you.
Oh.
The
Anyone?
purpose is to try to get the meaning that the original author is trying to portray in the story.
Yeah. And where do you find that?
In the resolution.
Okay.
Well, to get the principle, you have to know what the problem is.
Okay. How do you get the principle? You have to know what the problem is, but
Well, I mean, to get the idea of what the story's talking about, you have to know what the problem is and how the climax and how it gets resolved. If you have the wrong problem, then you're not going to get the right idea that they're trying to talk about.
right. So you have this thing called the story arc, right? And you have setup stuff, intro material, right? Setting, time, place, introduce some characters, whatever, right? It's the beginning of the movie, you're getting a window into people, where they live, what their lives are like, whatever, right? Introductory stuff. And then at some point, all of this, this is how stuff normally is. At some point, that's gonna get out of whack, right? So how things kind of normally are is going to get disrupted. Right? And then the story builds as more and more stuff goes wrong. Yeah. There's some sort of a climax, and then things start to get resolved, right?
Yeah.
And then you have closing material, you know, the aftermath, you know, let's celebrate, yay, everything got fixed, or whatever, you know, whatever it is.
Depends on the movie.
Right, depends on the movie, yeah. So, if you think about, Star Wars, let's do, Star Wars, the original Star Wars, in honor of, the retiring Kristen, alright? So you have set up, you have this dude named Luke, he's living on Tatooine, and, you know, he's just kinda going about life, right? He's living with his aunt and uncle, they're moisture farmers, it's all setup
That's the
stuff,
funniest thing ever.
right? It's all setup stuff, you know? And then, you know, they need a new droid, and they buy some droids from the Jawas, and, you know, and then next thing you know, this droid spits out a message for Obi-Wan Kenobi. Help me, Obi-Wan Kenobi, you're my only hope. And so all of a sudden, Luke's like, wait a second, we gotta figure out who this lady is, and is Obi-Wan Kenobi old Ben Kenobi? Like, what? Maybe we need to take the droid out and find old Ben Kenobi and figure out what's going on. Like, things are starting to get disrupted, right? The way things normally are, you know, peaceful life as a farmer is getting disrupted. And then, you know, he goes on a little journey, and any good story, you can't get from point A to point B without problems happening. Otherwise, it's not a good story. You know, so he's going to go find Obi-Wan Kenobi, but, you know, he runs into sand people, and kind of stuff goes wrong, and whatever. But then at some point, as part of all of this disruption stuff, Obi-Wan is like, hey, you know, you should come to Alderaan with me, you know. And Luke's response, well, I was going to touch the stage to pick up some power converters. You know, you got this whole, like,
Voice.
like, there's disruption, but I don't want to be disrupted, blah, 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 you know. And you just have building disruptions all along the way. And really, the bulk of the movie, with the Star Wars example, is this. In terms of time spent in the movie, it's this. Because eventually, in the original Star Wars, right, we blow up the Death Star, it's a big climax, woohoo, right? And then things get resolved. Things go back to normal, we have a big party, and there's the scene at the end of the movie, the original Star Wars, the scene at the end of the movie with the cool triumphant music playing, and all the people gathered, and the heroes walking down the aisle, so to speak. But even though we're used to this, right? We're used to this basic pattern of how a story works. The big question is, where do you find meaning in the story? Like, if you wanted to walk away with what's the take-home lesson of Star Wars, you know, what's the point that I'm supposed to walk away with?
A resolution.
What about it?
Things
Oh.
are getting resolved at that point, so we've already been through all the things that can go wrong,
Yeah.
and that's reached its climax, and now it's all coming together in your resolution.
Yeah.
In that movie, the resistance is at their wit's end.
or they're coming towards that, like, oh, I can't do this anymore. And then with that arc, introducing Luke and the droid and all of that, like the movie's title, The New Hope, it spurns a new wave of people willing to fight. And so, yeah, the Death Star's blown up, hey, but that's not the end. You still have everything else to handle, but now you have this, you know, renewed desire to do so, and so it pushes people to continue fighting the fight.
I don't disagree with anyone with anything that anyone is saying, but it doesn't answer the question. Because the question is, where do you find meaning? Yes, you find it in the resolution, but only if the resolution is tied to the rest. There are things that get resolved, there are things that could be resolved that were never really the original disruption. There are disruptions or problems that can occur as you were pointing out, like there's all these potential problems in the Scripture Labs thing, right?
Oh, yeah.
As like, there's 8 problems to choose from. The fact that something is maybe a problem doesn't mean that it's the point of the story at all. Okay?
It's understanding the stuff underneath of the hill. I think is how Scott said it.
Okay? What does that mean?
Like, understanding, like, the author, the person who's shared, like, he gave the example of the candy and candy for breakfast stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And if you are a kid, like, what lens you're viewing it through. So you're viewing it through the lens of the person who's telling the story. That's how you get the meaning.
Okay?
So, I mean, if the disruption and the aftermath, I mean, if those two things are aligned, then you know you're on target. So like, for example, Leia's like, oh, Mom, you're like a only hope.
Yeah.
And then at the end, like, the 3 of them walking down, that renewed hope is there. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
So you get it from what's the issue, what's the disruption, then is that resolved through what happened in the aftermath? If so, then you know you got the right problem.
Yeah, good. That's what I'm trying to get at is meaning lies in how the pieces work together. Right? So there's setup elements, there are problems that can crop up. But if the author doesn't like work through the problem or resolve the problem, then it lets you know that it's not the problem that the author is interested in. Okay? And you have to pay attention to what is the problem that the author is interested in. Well, what problem gets resolved? What problem gets heightened as time goes on? What problem is at the climax of the story? And then that allows you to begin to clue in on what the author is actually interested in. And that's a big deal for interpretation, because it's really easy to get obsessive about things that the author is not obsessive about. So, for example, back to the Genesis 12 thing that Scripture Labs uses, is it a problem that Abraham lies? Well, you can say that lying is problematic, but is it the problem that the story is concerned with? What is the problem that the story is concerned with in Genesis 12?
Sarah not being with her husband.
Okay, and why is that a problem? Tie that to earlier in the chapter. Why is that an issue?
Because God's promised to give offspring.
Okay, so if you go back to the very beginning of chapter 12, God shows up and says to Abe, go from your country, etc. I'll make you into a great nation, blah, blah, blah. Abram goes. And so this stuff needs to occur. And then in verse 7, Yahweh appeared to Abram and said, to your offspring, to your descendants, I will give this land. Right? That's part of the setup. Okay? And where it gets disrupted is the potential for offspring comes into jeopardy. Make sense? Okay? Now, to some extent, you could say, well, the reason this problem of offspring comes into jeopardy is because Abraham lied. But, and that's correct. But, if you look at what the narrator is obsessed with, it's not fixing whether or not Abraham is a liar. Okay? If Abraham lying was the big issue, then you get something about how Abraham lied and that led to this problem, and then he lied again, and then he tried to get out of that lie with another lie, and then he gets caught in his lies, and then the Lord shows up and is like, dude, stop lying, or whatever, right? And then Abraham starts telling the truth, whatever. Right? You get what I'm saying? It's, if the point of the story is you're going to get yourself in trouble by lying, then this whole arc is going to be very different. You get what I'm saying?
Yes.
Okay, so if somebody shows up and says, look, Genesis 12 is a story about the problems you can get into if you lie, you kind of got to flunk that answer. 50, I'll give it a 30%. Right? It's not a 0 because he did lie. It's not a 0 because the lie led to some problems. But it's still an F because it's not what the story cares about. You get what I'm saying?
Yes.
Okay? So part of being biblical is emphasizing what the text emphasizes and not emphasizing what the text doesn't emphasize. So if you're gonna I'm gonna have a lesson about Genesis chapter 12, and it's all about the problems you get into when you lie, you're not being biblical at that point, because you're choosing to emphasize something that the text is not emphasizing. You get what I'm saying? This is a normal thing that we do, that we think we're being biblical, but we're not actually emphasizing and tracking what the author cares about. We're picking up on some little thing that kind of rubs us the wrong way or whatever, and running with it. And at the end of the day, that's not actually being biblical. Are you with me so far? Okay. So, what does the author in Genesis 12 really care about? You've kind of said it already, but say it again. What?
God's promise.
Okay, be more specific.
God's promise of offspring. And
Okay.
it coming into jeopardy and humans questioning it.
And?
It not failing.
Why?
Because God is faithful.
How so? How so?
You gave him a kid.
Oh, I don't know. We're still in chapter 12. We're still in chapter 12.
Abraham was
No.
obedient.
Help.
His wife was returned to
Thank you,
him.
Cara.
Okay, resolution, the wife is returned. How so?
After God sent a bunch of stuff on Pharaoh.
Yeah.
And then he gets kicked out of the city or whatever.
So Abram's obedience has nothing to do with this at this point. Later.
Later,
yes.
it does, yes.
Later, yes. But at this point, this is purely that God has already said, I'm going to give this land to your offspring. And the giant problem is that the offspring issue has come into jeopardy because now Sarah is Pharaoh's wife. And that's what gets resolved in the climax. Right? Where God takes things into his own hands, brings stuff on Pharaoh. Pharaoh figures it out and is like, dude, what the?
Like,
What were
I
you
mean,
thinking?
Probably with Pharaoh.
Why, yeah.
When they say wife, that doesn't mean his only wife, right?
What?
When in the Bible, Genesis 12, when it says Pharaoh took her for his wife, that doesn't mean that that's his only wife, right?
No, it's just wife.
Like
It's
Like
saying
he
I
had
have a
multiple
car.
wives,
Doesn't mean
or-
it's my only car. It's just a car.
okay.
Yeah.
So he probably had a lot more wives too.
Pharaoh?
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Interestingly though,
He could afford.
throughout most of history, this is a total aside, it has nothing to do with Genesis 12. Throughout the majority of ancient history, Egyptian princesses were not married off to foreigners. It was abnormal for an Egyptian princess to be married off in a political arrangement. Anyone know why? Pharaoh was considered a human manifestation of the sun deity, the primary deity of Egypt. And so if the human manifestation of the primary deity has children, then those children have deity elements to them. It might not be full-blown gods in and of themselves, but certainly deity, divine elements. I don't know how you would say that, but and so you don't send your gods off to other countries. So it's wildly abnormal for Egyptian princesses to be married off in political arrangements, because you're essentially sending off your deities into foreign lands, which
So would
you
they have
don't
been
do.
married to a native then?
What?
Would they have been married to a native then?
Yeah. Where this becomes relevant is Solomon had a wife who was the daughter of Pharaoh. So when you see that in Kings, it's a statement of the power, the relative power of Israel vis-a-vis Egypt at that time, which is really abnormal. It's really just, it's extraordinary. So, anyway, I digress. Okay, so the thing we're getting at here in all of this is, in the setup you might find problems, but you kind of watch, like, what does the author care about? What is the author intent on resolving? And that lets you into what really matters from the author's point of view. Okay? Now, what do you do with that information? Okay, so go back to chapter 12. The thing that really gets carried through is you have this promise at the beginning of the chapter as part of the setup that I'll give this land to your offspring. And then this offspring issue gets disrupted, and you see the kind of heightening of the story. Sarah is in fact eventually in Pharaoh's household, and oh no, this is all going to go wrong. How is this going to work out? And God does stuff, again, in light of, to your offspring I'll give this land, and God takes care of this stuff. Pharaoh figures it out and is like, dude, what are you doing to me, man? And Sarah goes back to Abraham's house, and this stuff gets resolved, and then you have aftermath stuff like Abraham being treated well and sent off with a bunch of goods and everything.
And his wife.
What?
And his wife.
And his wife.
With them, yeah.
He gets his wife, and he gets wealthier as a result of this whole thing. Now, what if I show up and I say, look, Abraham did this lie, God bailed him out, and Abraham ends up wealthier than ever. So, moral of the story. Doesn't matter what you do, whether you lie or not, God's gonna, make people wealthy. Like, how do you know not to turn that into the main point of the story?
That's not the true character of God.
That is true, but it is the wrong answer. All right?
What was
Just
the
the
answer?
story.
Okay.
You don't know anything about the character of God at this point. This is Genesis 12.
Doesn't teach anything.
It's Genesis 12. Right? What do you get from Genesis 12 that lets you know? Not the point.
Not connected to the disruption.
Yeah, there you go. Right, guys? I mean, come on. Story arc. It's the whole thing we've been talking about. Right? It's the same thing. It's the answer is the same as, why isn't Abraham lying the whole point of the story? Because it's not the thing that's carried through the story arc. Why isn't Abraham's wealth the point of the story? Because it's not the thing that's carried through the story arc. You get what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Okay? When you learn how to register the story arc, it allows you to begin to see what's the point and what's not the point. Right? And my guess is that for most of you, when you try reading the Bible as a whole, but in this particular instance, we're talking about stories. My guess is that for most of you, the stories feel really flat. Like, it all just feels the same. I don't know where the high points are. I don't know where the big points are. I don't know what to emphasize. It just all feels real flat. Just the thing, and then the next 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 thing. Like, is that an experience for you?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So how do you know? Let go of Abraham lying, that's not the point. Let go of Abraham getting richer, that's not the point. How do you know? It's this. This is how you know. Okay? It's tracking. What problem gets heightened, hits a climax, and gets resolved? That's how you know what the text cares about. That's how you know. That's why I can stand up on a Sunday morning in a sermon and say, yeah, Abe gets wealthier. It just happens. Why can I say that? Because I've done this. Because I know that Abe getting wealthier is just like, it's just something the narrator feels like throwing in as part of the aftermath of everything that's going on. It's how I know to not make a big deal out of it. It's how I know to not make a big theological point out of it. It's how I know to not make a big theological point in a sermon about Abraham lying. This is how I know. Okay? This is why, guys, I'm just going to be utterly blunt and honest with you. Okay? This is why I sound way more biblical than what you're used to hearing. It's this. It's because I've learned how to emphasize what the Bible emphasizes, and I've learned how to not emphasize what the Bible does not emphasize. It's that, period, end of story. And when you're dealing with narrative, this is how you know. Okay? This is how you know. And this is what gives me the confidence on a Sunday morning to say, here's some information that we're given. And move on. It's because if I'm here, or I'm here, some info we're given. Wow. You get what I'm saying?
Yes.
Okay. One of the things that I've been told a few times over the years, it always kind of, on the one hand, I take it as a really fantastic compliment. On the other hand, it makes me super nervous because it was something that was said of Jesus. but I've been told a fair number of times, you know, you preach as one with authority. I'm always a little nervous, like, oh, is that just some personality, like, do I have a strong personality, and so they think I teach as one with authority? That's scary. But I've thought about it over the years, and I've become relatively convinced that I come across as one who preaches with authority because I have no interest in any authority of my own. My interest is, what is the text trying to say? What does the text emphasize? So let's emphasize that. What does the text de-emphasize? So let's not emphasize that. And it comes across as you preach as one with authority. And all I'm doing is being more biblical than you're used to hearing. Okay? And for narrative, that's where it comes from. Okay? If I can't track some issue through some disruption of a setup, through some heightening sequence of usually stuff going wrong, but some heightening sequence of action, through some sort of climax, and oh, by the way, this is almost always, not always, almost always, this is where God shows up. And then track that issue through I don't mean shows up for the first time. You know, God might be talked about. But what I mean is, like, this is where God, like, intervenes. Okay? This is where God shows up. And then you see stuff start to work out. And then this aftermath stuff, sometimes it's real brief, you know, a verse or two at the end of a chapter, but, you know, it varies. All right, conceptually, I know you can't, I know that I can't just start dropping passages on you and you're gonna be like, oh, this is easy, all right, I get that. But conceptually, does this make sense?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, now, what I want to do is I want to tie this to the textbook stuff, the interpretive journey, and then I figured we should look at a story. Does that sound fun?
Yes.
All right. So first, let's tie it to the interpretive journey. Remember that the interpretive journey in the book, the basic gist is understand the text in their town, right? So when I talk about the narrative arc, that's what I'm doing. I'm understanding it in their town. Part of understanding it in their town is, what's the author obsessed with? And if the author isn't obsessed with it, I shouldn't be obsessed with it. No matter what my culture says I should be obsessed with, if the author of the biblical text is not obsessed with it, like lying in Genesis 12, I don't need to care. Okay? When I say I don't need to care, I don't mean I shouldn't care about lying in my life. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is, in the story of Genesis 12, I should not look at Abraham's lie as like the thing that I need to care about. You get what I'm saying? Okay? It's like last week when we looked at the David Bathsheba thing and Nathan shows up. And it's like, Dave, you know, there once was a guy, a very rich guy. He had a lot of sheep. He had a lot of lambs. There once was a very rich man, right? And he says this stuff. Right? I don't make a big deal out of the sex. Does that mean it was okay? No. Not at all. Okay? So if I say something like, when I read that story, I don't care about the sex. Not about the sex. Am I saying that what David did was okay? No, not at all. What I'm saying is, what does the author care about? the author, as we looked at last week, the author views the sex as a symptom of a bigger issue. And the bigger issue was David used his power that God had given him to take advantage of someone else. Right? So if I'm ever preaching that story, what am I going to emphasize? Adultery? No. I'm going to emphasize the use of power. And you get what I'm saying?
Yes.
Am I emphasizing the use of power because adultery is okay? No. Am I somehow sending the message adultery is not that big of a deal? No. The message I'm sending is this passage cares about this issue. I promise you there are plenty of other passages that care about the adultery issue. And if I'm preaching one of those, guess what issue I'm going to emphasize? You get what I'm saying?
Yes.
It's part of being biblical is to emphasize what the author is emphasizing. And when you're in story, this is how you know what the author is emphasizing. If the author does not treat it as a problem that gets worse, that has some sort of climax, usually where God shows up, that gets resolved, it is not the issue. You should not emphasize it. All right? Now, how does this apply to our interpretive journey thing from the book? All right. So, I'm doing this work to see what problems actually get made a big deal out of and all this stuff, right? That's understanding it in their town. That's part of their town work, okay? Historical cultural stuff, like Abraham is a shepherd and he acts like one. He's actually what we would call a semi-nomadic pastoralist, if you want to get more specific, okay? And that's part of their town stuff, right? The need to, for example, in the spring, to the ability to be far away from the cities and to not have conflict with the cities because there's rains. You can feed your flocks, way out wherever, right? So you get far away from the cities. But in the summer, when everything gets barren and dries up and there's no rain, we got to get near the cities. Why? Why does a semi-nomadic pastoralist, someone with flocks, need to get near the cities during the dry season, which is the summer for them?
Wells or water.
Wells. Where are cities built?
Water supply.
Where there's a water supply. So the reason a semi-nomadic pastoralist comes into contact with cities during the dry season is because the cities are built on wells. You don't build a city where there's no water source. Okay? You just don't. Anytime you read a city name in the Bible, you should assume there's a water source. You know what I'm saying? Okay? All that's their town kind of stuff. Tell him you're my sister. What's he doing? He's anticipating that there's going to be potential conflict with the city. This is a normal thing in the ancient Near East, that the semi-nomadic pastoralists would come into conflict with the cities because there's conflict over resources, right? That's all their town kind of stuff. You get what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. Okay? So we're doing the their town work. And part of the their town work is this. You're tracking what the author is caring about. Okay? Their town. Now, you look at all of this their town stuff, and you come up with a principle. So Genesis 12. Okay? Genesis 12. The disruption, the big problem is Sarah going into Pharaoh's household, which brings into jeopardy the problem. Brings into jeopardy the promise of offspring in chapter 12, verse 7, right? You with me? All right, so, hey, I'm gonna give this land to your descendants. Uh-oh, your wife is gonna be someone else's wife. Lightning drama. God shows up, plagues, etc. And Pharaoh's like, come on, man! And then this gets resolved. And Sarah is back with Abe. So in terms of something that we could track all through this arc, it's Sarah's potential role in, hey, to your offspring, I'm going to give this land. Sarah ending up somewhere else. Which at first do you realize this could be resolved totally differently, right?
Yeah.
It could be, hey, to your descendants, I'm going to give this land. Oh, well, you just sold off Sarah. Introduce Beth, or whatever, right? Like, and then the drama could be, all of this. That Sarah has kids with Pharaoh, and Sarah realizes Pharaoh's a way better guy than Abe, and Abe's like, come on, come back, and Sarah's like, no way, and God shows up with Beth, and right? The story could be totally different, right? But that's not what the story does. Okay, the story sets up to your descendants. I'm going to give this land. This gets disrupted by Sarah getting sold off into Pharaoh's household. God shows up and fixes that. Sarah's back in Abe's household, which gets us back on track with verse 7. To your descendants, I'll give this land. Okay? So what's the principle? We just did the Fairtown work of identifying that I'll give the descendants, Sarah, blah, blah, blah. We did the Fairtown work. Now, how do you come up with a principle of that?
The nature of God.
What?
The nature of God, like his faithfulness to his word.
Oh, that's a good possibility. God said, hey, I'm gonna give the land to your descendants. And then that all has the potential to get messed up, right? So the faithfulness of God to his word. That's a good one. What else? Other possibilities? We're just brainstorming.
Just to trust God. Because the problem happened when Abraham didn't trust.
Okay. I'm gonna come back to that. I need to make a note to myself.
Well, it feels like that, and not intentionally necessarily, but it does feel like in that story that Abram is testing that faithfulness. Like, well.
Whose faithfulness?
Of God.
God is testing his own faithfulness?
No, that Abram is testing God.
Oh, all right. Why does it seem like Abe is testing God?
Well, he's not willing to tell people that she's my wife, and in that case, that leaves her open to, being sold away into another household where he's not there, then they're not together to do that bit. And leaves her open to other people coming to fill that role.
All right, what else?
I think you can also say the foolishness of man.
Foolishness of man?
Yeah.
How so?
He thought he could fix it. He could fix the problem, He could anticipate it and fix the issue. And he decided to use his own wisdom. And that just made a bigger mess. So. Not relying on man's wisdom.
What's that?
So not relying on man's wisdom and wisdom.
Okay.
And wisdom of man.
Yeah. Great. Other options? These are good for now. How would we choose?
Run through the grid,
Run through the grid.
the arc,
Run through the arc.
the story arc.
Good. So run through the story arc. What do you come up with?
All of them.
Combination of the first two.
ask you a question. What's the climax of the story?
God showing up.
What?
God showing up.
God showing up. Huh. That's interesting. What does that tell you?
Well, I guess, I'm just talking this through in my brain, okay, so if God says, hey, you're gonna have a bunch of kids.
Yeah.
And then you give up the one thing that's going to allow you to do that, and then God has to come in to the situation to return that lost person, so that his plan can be fulfilled. Sorry, I'm thinking it through. Like, God's saying like this, you're going to have children at the end, you have to have that. You have to have your woman with you in order for this to be fulfilled. So you need to trust in the plan, like write it out, that you screwed up because your decision is what interrupted my master plan. And so, say it again, what you said up there.
The climax?
The climax is when,
I didn't say it. Someone else said it. I don't remember who. You said it. What'd you say?
When God shows up.
But the God-
intervenes.
Yeah, it's when God intervenes, right? It's when God shows up and it's like does the stuff to Pharaoh that gets Pharaoh to realize something's going on.
So despite our missteps, God's still gonna show up.
Maybe.
this plan's ultimately going to
He's
be,
powerful, yeah. That's
like,
it.
this plan's gonna be fulfilled, God's gonna win, and we're just along for the ride.
You're shockingly close, actually. There is actually some seriously pristine theology in what you just said.
Good job.
Pristine
theology. Let's go.
Specifically, the comment that we're just along for the ride.
So as dumb as we are, God is still going to make sure that his plan comes through, basically.
Yeah, here's what I like about what you're saying. You're talking about God. Notice how these are about people. So let me ask you, what does the text emphasize? God says, hey, I'm going to give the land to your descendants. Abe lies. Climax.
God comes up to clean it up.
It is a word that always comes to
But God. Okay. We resolve some stuff, Abe gets wealthy, etc. What does the climax tell you?
The purpose,
It's about
or
God.
the,
It's about God.
yeah, the principle,
Yeah.
the principle is.
It's about God. Your principle better be about God, because the climax of the story is about God. Yeah.
I have a question, because earlier, did you say the purpose is when, how they all fit together?
Yes, but if I'm understanding your question correctly, the answer is
Because
yes.
then the other parts were all about Abraham, right? So how would you know, would it always be the climax, or would it be, because some of the other pieces seem to make it seem like it'd be about man.
Yeah. Yeah. Great question. Look at the climax. And think of the climax. Here's why Scott and I have argued about using the word climax for this. Okay. In my opinion, Scott and I differ on this. In my opinion, there can be story climaxes that are different than what Scott is calling the climax. Scott's calling the climax the point where the problem begins to get resolved. which is not necessarily the emotional high point of the story.
Right.
Now, a lot of times that coincides, okay? So, anyway, so for our purposes here, climax is that point at which the problem begins to get resolved. Which is why God showing up is almost always what happens. Because God's the one who resolves the problem. It's kind of amazing. So, part of what I'm driving at here is there an element, maybe a substratum of the story, where we could say, hey, Abe kind of tried to use his own wisdom. Yeah, you can totally say Abraham tried to use his own wisdom. But can you say that God was upset at Abraham for trying to use his own wisdom? Can you say that God reprimanded Abraham for trying to use his own? Abe tried to act as best as he could. Abe did the best he knew how to do. Spin it that way. You see what I'm saying? Because usually, and I've heard this a lot, usually from, usually the setting is students, right? We work through this thing. And I hear this whole thing, this comes up almost every time, right? Well, Abe just needed to rely on the Lord. Well, that's great. You're right. He needed to rely on the Lord. But how was he supposed to know that the Lord was going to make it happen through Sarah? Did God say that? All God said was, hey, I'm going to give this land to your descendants. Is Abe supposed to automatically assume that means Sarah? Not in his culture. Now to us, it's like, well, of course, that's his wife, right? That's our culture. That's not their culture. Is your culture better? Maybe, but was he supposed to know that? Did God hold him accountable to having a better culture? Did God hold Abraham accountable to having a culture that agrees with your culture? No, not at all. Did God address the lie at all with Abraham? No. Then why are you making any sort of a deal out of this? If you're going to make any sort of a point out of Abraham being foolish and using his own wisdom and blah, 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 here's the point you better make. God in his grace recognizes that we're doing the best we can. And he meets us where we're at. And he works with us. That's the point you better make. Because as soon as you start making the point that Abraham got himself into all kinds of trouble because he was foolish and relying on his own wisdom, and see, if he had just relied on God, everything would have been... As soon as you go down that whole path, you're going down a path the author of Genesis did not go down. You get what I'm saying? Okay? So you look to the climax, the point of the story where things start to get resolved, and what do you see? You see that God said something, and he decided how he was going to fulfill that. And he is capable. Really, more than anything, you see a God who's capable. Because, again, from the pure context of the story, you cannot assume that Sarah marrying off to a different family means that the promise over here is no longer valid. Because the promise was, I'm going to give this land to your descendants. That's different than, hey Abe, I'm going to give this land to your descendants, the descendants that you have through Sarah. That doesn't come until later. A lot later. And when it does, it's pretty crazy. Because then, well, I'm getting ahead of myself. But anyway, it's pretty awesome. You get what I'm saying?
Yes.
Yeah, like this goes back to this whole conversation that we kicked this whole thing off with about God being present and angry. Right? Think about how easy it is to go here. Abe trusted in his own wisdom. And by the way, I'm not saying this is what you were saying. Right? I'm okay. I'm using this to riff on a different point. All right? All right. I just want to make sure we're good. Okay. Right? But like, this is our tendency, right? I mean, I get it. Like, you read it and you're like, come on, Abe. Man, you just need to cry out to the Lord and have faith in it. Abe is doing the absolute best he can, the best he knows how. He's using the wisdom he has to do the best he possibly can. And as soon as we start looking at it and saying, if only Abe had more faith, everything would have worked out. Think about how utterly, A, normal that is in our thinking, and B, how utterly unbiblical that is. How absolutely normal is it that we think that if we're faithful and obedient to the Lord, everything's just going to work out? Right? That's how we operate. You get sick, be faithful to the Lord and everything will work out. Somebody gets sick and we're like, oh, what did they do wrong? Right? It's horrible, but we do it. Right? We do this stuff. We do this stuff. Our default as people is, if we have faith and do the right thing, everything's going to work out great. How'd that work for Jesus?
And he rose from the dead.
How did it work out for Job? The testimony of Scripture is that the more righteous and holy you are, the worse your life's going to get. That's fascinating. If you think about it, the people in Scripture, the two most highly spoken of in Scripture, Jesus and Job, those are the two given the best descriptions of their life of holiness and piety and trusting in the Lord. Huh. Good luck. And yet still, why? Because we have this deep-seated thing that God's present and he's angry and he's just waiting for everything to go wrong because of our stupidity. And when we carry that, again, I'm not saying this is what you did. You were just riffing. You were brainstorming. It was amazing. It was very good. It was very appropriate. Okay? I'm saying the temptation for us is to go down this path. It's not biblical. It's not a biblical path, right? And this goes back to the whole, like, the conversation that I had with a friend a long time ago. You know, like, Eric, you don't, like, talk like the normal person on, you know, about this kind of stuff. How did that happen? Well, Leviticus, you know, but Old Testament as a whole. It's stories like this. I'm watching a guy do the best he can. And when he does the best he can, he lies. He tries to make treaties because that would have been the norm for the head of a semi-nomadic pastoralist family, for the patriarch, the leader of a semi-nomadic pastoralist clan. That leader, when he has to come into contact with the city to provide provision for his clan, he's in a desperate and vulnerable situation. Guys, he's in a desperate and vulnerable situation. And he's scared, and he's doing the best he can to protect his people. Okay? And the Lord bails him out. So, our principle of Genesis 12 better be something about God. Right? Something about the faithfulness of God. Something about the fact that God bailed Abe out. And God is capable of intervening into a situation, right? Genesis 12, this seems like an utterly impossible situation, right? You're dealing with the most powerful man on earth, basically. So you're dealing with a God who shows himself capable and shows himself willing to be empathetic to the fact that you're doing the best you can. So take that principle and apply it to your own life. So you serve a God who sees you, who understands you, who understands your vulnerability, who understands your trials, and he's capable. See what we did? We did the their town work. We got to the principle, paying real good attention to what the text paid attention to. And then we bring that to our town. I serve a God who sees me, who is capable, who is empathetic, who understands I'm doing the best I can, and is willing to walk with me, bail me out when I need bailed out. It's a good God we serve. Okay? I said one comment, but I'm going to make a couple comments.
Go for it.
All right. First off, one of the things that it says in there several times is, hey, pay attention to the fact that one of the main characters in the Old Testament is God. Like, treat God as like an actor in what's going on, right? I just, slightly amend that. The main character in the Old Testament is God. All right? And our tendency is to get hung up on the people. Okay? And like I said, when you track the story arc, you find that when things start to get resolved, enter God. Right? It's just, that's a normal thing. Okay? So treat it as though, how would I say this? Treat God as the main character of the Old Testament. You're looking for what God is going to do, okay? Don't get all hung up on what Abraham does, or what Isaac does, or what Jacob does, or what Ruth does, or what David does, what Solomon, you get what I'm saying? Like, you're going to have a better chance of finding the high points, the resolutions, etc., if you look for what God's up to. Also, by the way, you're going to learn about God and who he is, what he cares about. That's a big deal. Okay? Now, I use that phrase a lot. Hey, you're going to see who God is and what he cares about and what his heart is, etc. And I don't know that ever lands. But this Genesis 12 thing is an example of what I'm talking about. Abraham lied. Let's face it. He did. God didn't really make a big deal out of that. Am I saying that God doesn't care if you lie? No, that's not what I'm saying. But am I saying that maybe, just maybe, he's got bigger fish to fry? Could be. How about this one? Is God more concerned about the lie you tell when you're backed into a corner and you're afraid and you're scrambling and you're doing the best you can? Or is God more concerned about the bigger picture of walking with you and bringing you to a place where you can see his goodness and faithfulness. Of course, I'm fast forwarding to later chapters in the Abraham narrative as I say that, but you know, what's he more concerned about? Yeah. Okay. So, that's an example of what I mean when I keep reiterating this thing of like you learn what God really cares about. And it might just be that you're obsessed over something in your own life that God's not maybe too overly obsessed about. Might be. Of course, there are other stories where it might be that you're ignoring something. Anyway. You're welcome. Just, you know, yeah. All right. I want to look at an interesting story in Exodus. So turn to Exodus 32. All right, Exodus 32. We're going to read for a while. Don't worry about them. That's my son's birds. They're in the back. Yeah.
You typically carry a bird with you?
There you go.
Part of the
Yeah, can you tell us about the birds while we have them?
We are we're going to Dallas tomorrow morning, and so the birds are here because they're on their way to being dropped off to the people who will take care of the birds while we're gone. So that's why the birds are here. All right.
I love it sometimes.
Yeah, they're pretty cool. I thought about letting them out and just flying around. Unfortunately, though, they're not potty trained. I mean, it's not that big of a deal, but you know. All right. I always get really upset at the birds, like, you know, pooping on the couch, and then, you know, my son's like, it's this big. What's the big deal? I don't know.
It's my couch, not yours.
Anyway.
Can't see it.
All right. So this is the famous golden calf story, and we're going to try and figure out what's going on with this thing.
Oh, brother. Can't wait.
All right, so let's keep the ark, not the Ark of the Covenant. Let's keep the story arc in mind.
Can you repeat the verse one more time?
Chapter 32. We're going to start in Exodus 32. And so listen for the problem, okay? Now, I'm just going to warn you up front, this story is a little more complex than Genesis 12, okay? But you're going to have some setup, of course. The story always starts with setup. Let's look for the problem. All right, somebody read for me. Start in Exodus 32 and just read until I say stop.
When the people saw that Moses was so long in coming down from the mountain, they gathered around Aaron and said, "Come, make us gods who will go before us. As for this fellow Moses who brought us out of Egypt, we don't know what's happened to him." Aaron answered,
All right, stand by. You're doing great. So right off the bat, you have potential problems, right? Now, I mean, again, this is what runs through my mind when I read narrative. Okay, when I kick off into a new scene, right? It's like, what is set up? What's going to be the thing that really gets picked up and messed with? Okay, so for right now, it's just potential problems. So what are the potential problems at this point? We don't know which one's actually going to turn out to be the thing, but there's a couple already.
Moses
Moses
was
is
taking a
MIA.
long time.
Yeah. Moses is gone, and what's the other one? Big one so far.
Make another
Yeah,
god.
male gods.
What?
They're taking their stuff and they're melting
Small
it down.
G gods.
Okay.
Small G gods.
Yeah, we don't know it's a golden calf yet. I got ahead of myself. I apologize. You're right. Make us gods. All right. So we have a couple things that might be the problem, but we don't know yet for sure, right? This could be set up. All right, carry on. Thank you. Verse 2.
Aaron answered them, "Take off your gold earrings that your wives, your sons, and your daughters are wearing, and bring them to me." So all the people took off their earrings and brought them to Aaron.
That could be a problem. Aaron
Being like Judas.
taking people's gold. All right, carry on.
Verse 4, he took what they handed him and made it into an idol cast in the shape of a calf,
All right,
fashioning it with a tool.
good. I already wrote that one down. Carry on.
They said, "These are your gods, O Israel, who brought you up out of Egypt."
All right, hold on. Why did people just laugh? I'm super curious. It's a real question. I'm not making fun.
Because how could it have brought them out of Egypt? It
Yeah.
was just created.
Right.
Yeah.
All right, this is why I should have brought my computer.
You want to show the golden calf?
Yeah.
It's not that big, right?
How big?
It's not very big.
You can always email it to me and I can
No,
send it to the group.
it's not. No, I mean I don't have a picture of
Oh.
the golden calf.
Oh.
I can carry it.
You don't carry it in your wallet?
There's very, very normal, we call it iconography. That's a fancy way of saying pictures. But we use the word iconography because it can be like statues, it can be wall reliefs, it can be paintings, like images, right? It's a very standard stock image in the ancient Near East to have some sort of a large creature, right? Whether this could be a cow, this could be a stag, like a deer, you know. This could very often, it's a lion, different animals, okay? And the norm is that there's a deity riding like that.
Good.
Okay? What?
I love your animal's hairdo.
It's a nice little.
Just saying.
Or is that the circles connecting?
Thank you.
You're welcome. That's good.
I like it.
So this is normal. I can show you just the many, many, many pictures of a deity riding an animal. Okay? So likely what you have, because the Israelites have been told, don't make an image of Yahweh, that's in the Ten Commandments. So when they say make us the gods, and they make the golden calf, what they're thinking of this, but we're not allowed to make an image of Yahweh. And that's what they're making. And so when they say, here's your God,
Oh, it's invisible.
who brought you out of
It's
Egypt.
more like an altar than a.
You said he's not there.
It's like it's a Lamborghini, man. This is a Bugatti. You know, you're making the deity's Bugatti that they're gonna ride around on. All right. I thought about bringing pictures, and then I thought maybe I could ignore it, but then everyone laughed. So anyway,
I liked it.
it's so let's not get hung up. All right, because it's not going to be a key determining factor for how the story turns out, okay? But just be aware of the fact that it's not as utterly illogical as it sounds to us.
Crazy.
You know what I'm saying? All right, carry on.
Verse 5. When Aaron saw this, he built an altar in front of the calf and announced, "Tomorrow there will be a festival to the Lord." So the next day the people rose early and sacrificed burnt offerings and presented fellowship offerings.
All right,
Afterward they
stand by. So we have all kinds of stuff going on. And as of this moment, we don't know what the problem's going to be. Right? Like you read this and you're like, oh wait, they're doing all these offerings. Is that the problem? Do you get what I'm saying? So for now, we're just like potential problems. Okay? This might all just be setup. All right, carry on.
Afterward, they sat down to eat and drink and got up to indulge in revelry.
All right, they partied hard.
Then the Lord said to Moses, "Go down, because your people whom you brought up out of Egypt have become corrupt. They have been quick to turn away from what I commanded them and have made themselves an idol cast in the shape of a calf."
All right, stand by. Now we have God saying what the problem is. And which problem did God point to?
Calf.
And?
How quickly
Idol.
they turned.
Idol.
They turned away from me.
Okay. So we turn away by doing this thing.
Sure.
We're going to put a little star next to it because the Lord said it. That could be a key indicator. But again, we don't yet know if this is going to be the big problem that's going to run the arc, the story arc, right? We're just kind of giving it a little bonus look because Yahweh identified it as a problem. You with me? All right, carry on.
They have bowed down to it and sacrificed to it and have said, "These are your gods, O Israel, who brought you out of Egypt." "I have seen these people," the Lord said to Moses, "and they are a stiff-necked people. Now leave me alone, so that my anger may burn against them, and that I may destroy them."
All right, stand by. So God calls them stiff-necked. So again, Yahweh is saying it, Yahweh is identifying it, so I'm going to put a star next to it. Because the fact that Yahweh is saying it is often an indicator that it's going to be the issue. But again, we don't know yet, right? All right, we have options so far. Do you see? And this has all been in the setup. So what we're going to do as we read on is we're going to listen for which one of these kind of get picked up on and dealt with. Does that make sense? Yeah. All right, carry on.
After I destroy them, then I will make you a great nation. But Moses sought the favor of the Lord his God. "O Lord," he said, "why should your anger burn against your people, whom you brought out of Egypt with great power and a mighty hand? Why should the Egyptians say, 'It was with evil intent that he brought them out, to kill them in the mountains and to wipe them off the face of the earth?'" Turn from your fierce anger, relent, and do not bring disaster on your people. Remember your servants Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, to whom you swore by your own self, I will make your
That
descendants.
literally says Israel.
Yeah, sorry.
It says Israel.
NIV's on your band.
All right, carry on.
"I will make your descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky, and I will give your descendants all this land I promised them, and it will be their inheritance forever." End quote. Then the Lord relented and did not bring on his disaster.
Sorry, go ahead. Finish the sentence.
Then the Lord relented and did not bring on his people the disaster he had threatened.
Okay, what just happened?
Moses pleaded.
Now, what did God say he was going to do?
Initially,
So Moses intervened.
wipe them off the face of the earth.
Okay. Here's our big story arc, right? And this, I'm just going to tell you for the sake of time, this is one of those amazing stories where in the setup, there's a little, okay? And here it is. The problem, God's going to destroy Israel. God
It's a little bump.
God will destroy. And then Moses is like, come on, man, that's going to give you a bad reputation. However you want to write that. And then God's like, all right, I won't do it. Right? Now, do you see how there was a problem and a climax that led to a resolution? Like all just this real tight thing within a bigger narrative. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
All right? We're still in the setup, but there's this little thing, this little mini arc, story arc, that's in this as part of the setup. Make sense? All right, carry on.
after the Lord relented, Moses turned and went down the mountain with the 2 tablets of the testimony in his hands. They were inscribed on both sides, front and back. The tablets were the work of God. The writing was the writing of God engraved on the tablets. When Joshua heard the noise of the people shouting, he said to Moses, "There is the sound of war in the camp." Moses replied, "It is not the sound of victory. It is not the sound of defeat. It is the sound of singing that I hear." When Moses approached the camp and saw the calf and the dancing, his anger burned, and he threw the tablets out of his hands, breaking them into pieces at the foot of the mountain. And he took the calf they had made and burned it in the fire.
Okay, stand by. Moses broke the tablets, so that could be a problem. That gets picked up later in the story, we'll see. By the way, it says, I don't want to dwell on this, because it's pretty irrelevant. But, you know, movies give you the impression that the tablets are like, you know, these giant, they're postage stamp size. You can, look, y'all, seriously, take a fine point pen, write the 10 Commandments, see how much space you need. Okay? You don't need, right? You can write this normal administrative tablets like this big. It's no big deal. Anyway, that's neither here nor there, but you know, instead of, you know, it's probably like, but
If it was too small, it wouldn't break into pieces.
doesn't really matter. It's clay, you know, who knows, whatever. Or stone or whatever, you know. Anyway, I digress. Carry on.
20. And he took the massive calf they had made and burned it in the fire. It doesn't say massive, sorry.
Oh.
Then he ground it to powder, scattered it on the water, and
Stand by, sorry. Okay, now, look, you just had another one of these. Because what did he do with the calf? Alright, so we've got a calf.
It's a mission.
We destroy it. And it's gone. So, people, this is not the main problem. Oh, what? Thought this is the story of the golden calf. That's gotta be the main problem. What are the people worried about that causes them to make a calf in the first place?
their leader.
Moses is gone, which is an indicator of what?
God.
Alright, so the golden calf is a symptom of a bigger problem, and the bigger problem is an absent God. You're reading a story of what people do when they fear that God is not with them. Yep.
So when you say absent God, that like links into the fact that they made the golden calf, and then they said, "Hey, look, here's God on top of there," but he's like not there, right?
I mean, they're close. They're the reason they're doing the idol is to like get God to be with them. Making an idol is their version of the prayers you say that you hope will guarantee God has to show up.
Oh.
You know how like you obsess about, well, if I get the wording of the prayer just right. That by the way is called idolatry.
So it's like a vehicle offered to God, essentially.
No, it's a way of trying to guarantee God has to show up.
Oh, like the mechanism.
It's the mechanism to get God to show up. Okay, and we have our own mechanisms. They're probably for most of us not building calves. Okay, but we have them. We do things. We get obsessed about the wording of our prayers, or, well, if I have my quiet time 7 days in a row and then pray the prayer with just these words, then God will show up. We do this kind of stuff. Okay? Bible has a word for that. A couple words, depends on the variety you're using, but words like divination and idolatry. Okay? Yes?
So the golden calf is not necessarily a new god, right? It's not like they're worshiping a new deity. It was their way of worshiping God when he was gone.
It's their way of trying to get Yahweh to be present.
That's crazy.
All right, they're trying to get Yahweh to be present. The golden calf has been taken care of, and what's the first thing Moses does? No, sorry, you're right. I meant pertaining to the golden calf. That should have been more specific. And
Made him drink.
Makes it drink.
yeah. Grinds it into powder and has them drink it. All right, now we'll put that over here because things are getting crazy.
Gold.
I'm gonna give him a cold
Right? Things are getting crazy. That's often an indicator of the rising tension in the story. And for the sake of time, I will tell you that we are definitely in the rising tension of the story. Carry on.
Then he ground it into powder, scattered it on the water, and made the Israelites drink it. He said to Aaron,
Why did he do that?
Good question.
What's he trying to accomplish?
To get rid of it?
Get rid of what?
The idol.
Get rid of the idol. But...
Make them drink it.
The
All right, we'll come back.
The
We'll come
idol.
back.
The
Let's
idol.
read on. We don't know yet. We'll read on.
He said to Aaron, What did these people do to you that you led them into such great sin? Do not be angry, my lord, Aaron answered. You know how prone these people are to evil. They said to me, Make us gods who will go before us. As for this fellow Moses who brought us up out of Egypt, we don't know what has happened to him. So I told them, Whoever has any gold, take it off. And they gave me the gold, and I threw it in the fire, and out came this calf.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's pretty awesome, huh? The Hebrew's even better, because it's like, I threw in the gold, and then, well, what happened? Like, I mean, well, not literally, but it's like, I mean, seriously, when you read it in the Hebrew, he's just like, I couldn't believe it. I mean, this thing it just popped out. It's like, wow. You know, anyway, it's pretty amazing. Sorry to digress. Carry on.
Moses saw that the people were running wild and that Aaron had let them get out of control and so become a laughingstock to their enemies. So he stood at the entrance of the camp and said, Whoever is for the Lord, come to me. And all the Levites rallied to him.
Mm-hmm.
Then he said to them, This is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. Each man strap a sword to his side, go back and forth through the camp from one end to the other, each killing his brother and friend and neighbor. The Levites did as Moses commanded, and that day about 3,000 of the people died. Then Moses said, You have been set apart to the Lord today, for you were against your own sons and brothers, and he has blessed you this day. The next day, Moses said to the people, You have committed a great sin, but now I will go up to the Lord, and perhaps I can make atonement for your sin. So Moses went back to the Lord and said, Oh, what a great sin these people have committed. They have made themselves gods of gold.
Okay, stand by. What does Moses think might work?
Killing.
After that. After that. All right, and so what is Moses trying to atone for? We have all these problems. What's Moses actually trying to atone for?
Turning away.
Okay, turning away by making the golden calf in order to get God to be present. Make sense? Do you agree? Like, does this actually make sense? Okay, because for the sake of time, I'm telling you that this stuff is symptomatic, right? Doing the gold thing, making the golden calf, doing the festivals, making the offering, all this stuff is symptomatic of this. They're scared that God's not with them, and they're going to do what it takes to guarantee that God is with them. And this is what God calls turning away by making a golden calf. And so now Moses is trying to fix that. Make sense? All right, carry on.
What a great sin they people have committed. They have made themselves gods of gold. But now, please forgive me their sin. But if not, then blot me out of the book you've written. The Lord replied to Moses, Whoever has sinned against me, I will blot out of my book. Now go, lead the people to the place I spoke of, and my angel will go before you.
All right, stand by. We have a couple twists here. Okay? First off, Moses is going to try and atone. Does it work?
No.
No. I'm glad that you immediately recognize that the answer is no. Because the answer is no. And we have an issue of an absent God. And what does God say? Is God going to go with them?
No.
Oh. So for now, he's going to send an angel along. All right. Carry on.
However, when the time comes for me to punish, I will punish them for their sin. And the Lord struck the people with a plague because of what they did with the calf Aaron had made.
Nice. Just getting worse.
Now we're into 33.
Yeah.
Then the Lord said to Moses, leave this place, you and the people you brought up out of Egypt, and go to the land I promised you on oath to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, saying, I will give it to your descendants. I will send an angel before you and drive out the Canaanites, Amorites, Hittites, Perizzites, Hivites probably, and Jebusites. Go up to the land flowing with milk and honey, but I will not go with you because you are a stiff-necked people, and I might destroy you on the way.
All right. Look at that. I'm not going with you. And you are. So what problems continue are now we're getting a feel for what are the actual problems. Because they're continuing to show up and be reiterated, and you have attempts to deal with them. At this point, you should feel pretty confident that the two issues this story is dealing with are the presence of God and the fact that people are stiff-necked. Make sense? There's all kinds of options in here, and honestly, the one people usually fixate on is golden calf, which is a symptom of a different problem. Do you see how, as you read the story and you track it and you watch for what keeps coming up, the story tells you what matters. And what matters is the presence of God, which right now is, I ain't going with you. I'm still going to give you what I promised, but I'm not going with you. And people are stiff-necked. Make sense?
Stubborn, stiff-necked.
Yeah, stubborn. You're gonna go your own. You're gonna do your own thing. All right, carry on.
When the people heard these distressing words, they began to mourn, and no one put on any ornaments. For the Lord had said to Moses, tell the Israelites, you are a stiff-necked people. If I were to go with you, even for a moment, I might destroy you. Now take off your ornaments, and I will decide what to do with you. So the Israelites stripped off their ornaments.
All right. Oh, that was the end of the sentence, right? Oh, not horror. Okay, so now we're going to have a no ornaments moment. Does that fix the problem?
No.
All right. So far, we have the problem of God's presence and the fact that people are stiff-necked. Moses has tried, I'm just going to tell you for the sake of time, Moses has essentially tried the equivalent of a magic ritual. He's done ritual here. Let's concoct a ritual that is going to fix this. Rituals, we do rituals. Our rituals look very different than the types of rituals that people did in the ancient Near East, okay? But he's defaulting to a ritual. You know, say your rosary, that'll fix it. Am I anti-rosary? No. But am I anti-thinking that if you say your rosary, it's automatically going to fix stuff? Yes. You get what I'm saying? You know? Right? So it's that kind of mentality. If we just do the ritual, it'll fix it. Does it fix it? No. Well, let's kill some people. Is that going to fix it? Does it fix it? No. Let's, you know what? I'll take it upon myself. Does that fix it? No. All right, well, let's do this. Let's all just make ourselves miserable. Does that fix it? No. All right, well, let's carry on. There's a bit about the tent of meeting. It's a complexity in the story that is super interesting, but for the sake of time, go to verse 12.
Moses said to the Lord, you have been telling me, quote, lead these people, end quote, but you have not let me know whom you will send with me. You have said, I know you by name, and you have found favor with me. If you are pleased with me, teach me your ways, so I may know you and continue to find favor with you. Remember, this nation is your people. The Lord replied, my presence will go with you, and I will give you rest.
Now that's interesting. Here's a twist on the presence of God. Moses is like, hey, stuff. And God's like, well, all right, I'll go with you. And what's Moses' response?
Then Moses said to him, if your presence does not go with us, do not send
With
us.
us. Do you see?
Yeah.
God, I can't do this without you. Well, I'll be with you. Yeah, but with us. You need to be with us. Carry on.
How will anyone know that you are pleased with me and with your people unless you go with us? What else will distinguish me and your people from all other people on the face of the earth? And the Lord said to Moses, I will do this very thing you have asked because I am pleased with you and I know you by name.
All right, stand by. Moses said, dude, you got to go with us. And God's response is, all right. Do you see the beginning of a resolution?
Yes.
Oh, we have a climax. Now, which issue is being addressed? Stiff-necked people or presence of God?
Presence of God.
Presence of God, and how did it get addressed? How did it get
With God.
fixed?
God going with him.
Well, that,
He was asked
yes.
to, though.
What?
He was asked to.
There you go. Moses asked. You want God to be with you? Well, do some rituals. That'll get him to be with you. No. Well, skip that one. Let's all be busy atoning for each other. No. Let's do self-imposed misery. No. What's the answer if you want God to be with you? Just ask.
Wow.
That's it. Just ask. All right, carry on. We still have another issue. People are stiff-necked.
Verse 18. Then Moses said, now show me your glory. And the Lord said, I will cause all my goodness to pass in front of you, and I will proclaim my name, the Lord, in your presence. I will have mercy on whom I will have mercy, and I will have compassion on whom I will have compassion. But, he said, you cannot see my face, for no one may see my face and live. Then the Lord said, there's a place near me where you may stand on the rock. When my glory passes by, I will put you in the cleft of the rock and cover you with my hand until I have passed by. Then I will remove my hand and you will see my back, but my face must not be seen.
All right, that whole thing is, hey, I'll be with you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? That's it. It's like tangible, I'll be with you. All right? Carry on.
The Lord said to Moses, chisel out 2 stone tablets like the first ones, and I will write on them the words that were on the first tablets which you broke. Be ready in the morning, and then come up Mount Sinai. Present yourself to me there on top of the mountain. No one is to come with you or be seen anywhere on the mountain, not even the flocks and herds who may graze in front of the mountain.
All right, stand by. Broken tablets just got fixed, but the reason you know it's not really that big of a deal is it got none of this. It was just like, yeah, it happened, so we'll deal with it, right? It's like, it's not primary information. Make sense?
They got none of what?
Huh?
They got none of those things right.
The broken tablets were not an issue in all of this build-up of all the crazy stuff. Okay? So it's like, we're recording it happened, we're recording it's getting fixed, but it's not getting any of the building of the story, any of the story arc. That's how you know it's just like,
Oh, okay.
all right, carry on.
So Moses chiseled out 2 stone tablets like the first ones and went at Mount Sinai early in the morning, as the Lord had commanded him. And he carried the 2 stone tablets in his hands. Then the Lord came down in the cloud and stood there with him and proclaimed his name, the Lord. And he passed in front of Moses proclaiming, the Lord, the compassionate and gracious God, slow to anger, abounding in love and faithfulness, maintaining love to thousands, and forgiving wickedness, rebellion, and sin. Yet he does not leave the guilty unpunished. He punishes the children and their children for the sin of their fathers to the 3rd and 4th generation. Moses bowed to the ground at once and worshipped. O Lord, if I found favor in your eyes, he said, then let the Lord go with us. Although this is a stiff-necked people, forgive our wickedness and our sin, and take us as your inheritance. Then the Lord said, I am making a covenant with you.
All right. Brilliant. What just happened?
Moses asked them to go again, even if they were stiff-necked, forgive them.
Okay. So,
And God made
we
it
still
official.
have this is the presence one. We want God to be present. So you ask. And God says, all right, I'll go with you. And we have this stiff-necked issue. And what does God do? God shows up to Moses, right? It ties into this presence thing. And oh, by the way, the section we skipped about the tent of meeting is an aside that gives you a description of how God was present. Okay? It ties into the story as like a background info on the presence of God. Okay? And what it requires is to ask. And then we have this issue of being stiff-necked. And does it get solved? Do the people cease being stiff-necked?
No.
No. So in that sense, it doesn't get solved. But what happens? God shows up, verse 6, and reveals something about who he is to Moses. Right? I am Yahweh. I am Yahweh. I am compassionate and gracious. I'm slow to anger. I'm abounding in love. Right? This stuff. And so Moses responds. And how does Moses respond?
Falls around to worship.
And
Forgive us.
there you go.
Yes.
So the presence issue, you just ask. The fact that you're stiff-necked, what's the solution? Just ask for forgiveness. This is the point of the story. How do we know? Because we followed the arc. We followed the narrative arc. We looked at what the potential problems were. We identified that some of the problems were more symptomatic of a bigger issue. We identified that the two issues that really got pointed to were the presence of God and the fact that people were stiff-necked. We watched those issues. We watched attempts by Moses to deal with those issues. And we see they don't work. And there's lessons in that, by the way, for us. Your rituals, your whatever, your attempts to manipulate God, your attempts to do things just right so God has to respond in a particular way, blah, blah, blah. It's all garbage. It doesn't work. You want God to be present? You ask. You acknowledge. You want the fact that you're stiff-necked to be dealt with? Just ask for forgiveness. By the way, the fact that they are stiff-necked doesn't get fixed. We are stiff-necked. But we ask for forgiveness. It's just ask. Just ask, right? If you started to get at a principle of this whole thing? God desires to be present. He desires to be with you. He's just waiting for you to ask. God knows that you're stiff-necked. God knows you screw stuff up. God knows you use your own wisdom instead of relying on God. God knows that you stress out. God knows all this stuff. You're dealing with a God who has complete capability of being empathetic with your plight. He sees you. So just ask for forgiveness and ask him to be with you. That's it. It's as simple as that. Make sense? Questions? Thoughts? Yes?
So reading this, when would you know, like, when the aftermath ends and when a new wave will begin?
When you start getting new problems. That's when you're like, oh, huh. And, you know, these are artists, right? They'll overlap stuff and do creative things. It's not very often that it's super cut. Genesis, like the scene, Genesis likes to do end scene. All right, new scene, you know, and then not everyone likes to do that. So you watch for new problems to get brought up and dealt with. Anything else? All right. I think I'll see you next week.